everyone. I'm Heather, and thank you so much for joining us today for another Homeschool Live. Today, we'll be hearing from our friends at Classic Learning Test. Joining me now are Alec, Bianco, and Taryn Murphy. Alec is the Homeschool Outreach Coordinator for CLT. He has been homeschooled his whole life, and he loves everything that has to do with education. He received his bachelor's from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. Taryn Murphy is a former homeschooler herself, and she has a bachelor's in philosophy and religion from Hillsdale College. In 2019, Taryn published her debut poetry book, Hello, My Name is Sentimental, and in 2017, Murphy wrote and recorded and released 2 soft pop songs, Polaroid and Oh Darling. I'm so excited to hear from both of you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. We're excited to be here.
So I just want to dive right in and find out what Classic Learning Test is. I'm so excited for our followers to hear about this. Could you share with us about what Classic Learning Test is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and get us started, and then Taryn, feel free to jump in after that. So I would just want to talk a little bit about the history of CLT. I mean, I think more often than not, one of the first questions we're asked is when we say we're an alternative to SAT and ACT, people ask us why. So the real important thing to ask and to answer is why are we here? And that's a big part of what we are. Is we are a for-profit company, but we are mission driven. We're for-profit because we believe that when you're talking about standardized testing, you're talking about essentially 2 key players: the College Board and the ACT. And these 2 testing organizations have been around for over 100 years. And have pretty much been the only ones, quite literally. There has never been another college entrance exam. There are other standardized tests, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but no other college entrance exam. And so that's where CLT really started back in 2015, 2016, when the SAT became fully Common Core aligned. Our founder, Jeremy Tate, was approached by he was a tutor at a school, at a Christian school at the time, and a lot of and guidance counselor, and a lot of the parents were approaching him and asking, okay, so what do our kids do? Like, we're not doing Common Core aligned curriculum at our school, right? But this test, both of these tests are now Common Core aligned, which means, are they really assessing our students properly? And so Jeremy was like, oh, don't worry, I'll go find the test that does work for us. Of course, it didn't exist, right? Because there hadn't been one except for these 2. And so Jeremy felt that, and I think a lot of people do, and we're finding out is hundreds of people, thousands of people do, feel like they're left in the lurch because the 2 big college entrance exams, for homeschoolers especially, are absolutely critical to getting into college. Aren't aligned with the curriculum, with the philosophy, with the mission that most homeschoolers, the reason why they're homeschooling in the first place, and they're not in public school. It doesn't make sense to be measured according to a public school standard when you are not publicly educated. So that's how CLT kind of first was born, was out of that desire to provide another option. Ultimately, just another option, not to replace SAT or ACT, maybe someday, who knows, but ultimately just to provide another option for families.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. When I first heard about CLT, a friend told me, she said, did you know there is another option? You don't have to do just the traditional SAT, ACT. I was just blown away. And the first thing that came to my mind, I know when I was thinking of SATs, and I didn't even think about Common Core, that essentially is what drove this company into existence. But there's an issue near and dear to homeschoolers' heart would be evolution. Obviously, most of us teach our kids what it is, but not that, that it's not biblical. So they're aware of it, but I don't know how much they go into that in the SAT. So I was always nervous. Would my children know how to answer those questions? So CLT, I don't know much about it, but I've looked at it. So you start with the word classic. And when I think of classic, obviously I think of like classical conversations. I think of Latin. Can you tell me why you named it Classic Learning Test and how that might align with like the classical learning approach? Is there a correlation there?
I can hop in on this one. So something that is kind of funny about our name is people often misspell classic learning test, classical learning test. And when I was first interviewing for a job at CLT, I made the same mistake. I don't know, I didn't think about it. And then one day I actually looked at the name of the company and I noted mentally, okay, it's classic learning test, not classical. And the reason for that is that the word classic conveys this idea of a timeless education, something that is grounded in timeless truth, beauty, and goodness. We're looking back to our heritage, to history, and we're trying to put students in front of these texts that have influenced philosophy and culture for millennia. And while that often caters well to students that have received a classical education, it's not necessary. And that's one of the beauties of CLT and the test, is that any student from any educational background can take it. People often ask, well, to score well on the test, do students have to read these texts? Like, does a student have to be familiar with Aristotle if they're going to do well in the CLT? And the beautiful answer is no, because the mission of CLT is introducing students to these texts. So whether a student has read them in class before, or whether they go to a school that has never introduced them to Aristotle, they're asked to engage with the text. They're asked reading comprehension questions, critical thinking questions that will allow them to kind of chew through all the knowledge and the wisdom in that text, but they don't have to have read it before. So that's kind of why classic learning test is named that, and it really harkens back to the root of classical education, which is discovering timeless truth, but it is not necessarily one and the same with classical education. Alec, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's so wonderful. And the only thing I would really add is, in many ways, classical education is just education. It's what it used to be 200 years ago. And also we could have named a test Good Book Test. I mean, what you want your kids to be reading good books, stories, fairy tales, right? We want them to be reading that, C.S. Lewis. That's why we put it on the test. Like, why wouldn't the test match the curriculum that if we want our kids to be reading good books, we should test them with good books. So that's ultimately why we do it.
So you mentioned C.S. Lewis. So my question is this a Christian company or a Christian test?
Yeah, so officially, no. It's not a religious exam. I think that some parents and students are surprised because they see how many religious authors are on the exam. That's because the Western and well, really every tradition in the world has been greatly informed by religion. In the West, primarily Christianity. But even, Judaism and Islam to a certain extent. I mean, there's authors from all kinds of backgrounds. So what I think it's Andrew Kern over at the Circe Institute, which is a classical education company, says it really well. We have a responsibility to our past, right? And to our tradition. Does that mean we accept everything? No. Does it mean we reject everything? Absolutely not, right? We have a responsibility to it, to respect that which ought to be respected, and to forgo and forget that which ought to be forgotten. So we have a lot of Christians on our exam, and proudly so. And we don't think that means we have to be a Christian company in order to do that.
Well, I just really appreciate what you said, because you would think that would be the norm and what everybody else would believe. But unfortunately, in this day and age, history is being torn out from under us. And like you said, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to believe it, but it is our history and we can't change it. And I appreciate that this company doesn't try to change it. So that's definitely a plus. I would love if you could tell us how classic learning tests can help homeschooling families. That's our audience. We homeschoolers are so excited to know there's another option out there. How can you help us?
So being a homeschooler myself, I remember taking a trip to the local public school to take my little standardized exams and fifth grade, eighth grade, and then it came time for SAT and ACT. And I just remember being confused. Now, it was sort of fun for me because I got to go to a real school for a day, and that was kind of exciting for me. But I do remember taking these exams and thinking, why am I here? And then I would go home and I would have my normal homeschool routine, and none of the things that I was being tested on in those exams was really relevant to that. Especially when I was taking the ACT and the SAT for college, it felt like something I had to do, not something that I really wanted to do. And when I got my scores back, it was like, okay, like, yeah, I'm good at reading. I knew that. I worked really hard on the science part, and good thing that showed. But I think a way that CLT is coming into the world of standardized testing and shaking that up is it doesn't want to just provide a product that is necessary and move on, but instead it wants to take something and use it as a tool and something to really invest in students and nurture their souls. So one way that ties into homeschooling is that the classic learning test provides really in-depth analytics and insights into students' reading comprehension, critical thinking, logic, mathematical reasoning, and it provides these analytics in great detail so that homeschool families can see how their student is doing and see in what areas their education might need some more in this realm or less in another realm. It really shows strengths and weaknesses a lot better than competing tests. But then another thing that CLT fits in well with a homeschooling education is that, again, the texts on the exam are usually similar to what homeschool students are reading. And it's challenging. And that's something that I find homeschool students are good at, is accepting a challenge and really putting their knowledge to the test. So the test puts students in front of these texts that are enriching and that provide a lot of room for thought. And I think homeschooling students can really benefit from that, and it pairs well with the education they're already receiving. But Alec is our homeschool guy at CLT, so I'll let him add on any more thoughts to that.
Yeah, I love that, Taryn. That was fantastic. So I think that there's not a whole lot to add more. It's just, I think that one of the things that makes CLT so powerful for a homeschooler compared to other standardized tests, and I want to emphasize that we have exams that go all the way down to 7th grade currently.
Oh, wow.
With exams that'll go all the way to the even lower grades, 3rd grade, eventually down the road. But we have 3 assessments currently: the CLT 8 for 7th and 8th graders, the CLT 10 for 9th and 10th grade, and then the CLT, the college entrance exam. So a lot of our marketing material and a lot of what people know is the college entrance exam, because that's how we started and it's kind of our baby. But the CLT 8 and the CLT 10 are, I think, incredible tools for end of grade assessments. And as of this fall, both exams are totally nationally normed reference and should satisfy end of grade requirements for pretty much any state in the United States.
Okay.
So you don't have to take your Iowas or your Stanfords anymore.
This is revolutionary. I mean, seriously.
Thank you.
I was just talking
to
I was just talking to someone yesterday. In our state, you can either have religious exemption or do the testing. And most parents, 95 that I know, I can't say I shouldn't say statistics, but most people that I know want to have that testing. They feel safer. And my one friend yesterday said, this is so frustrating. My kids take the test every year. And they said, Mom, I remember this question from last year. Mom, this is the same exact test. So I don't know how those tests work, but it was really frustrating for the children and for the parents. So knowing that there's another option, I'm going to get on the phone with her after this and let her know, because I didn't know that you could do this. For your state, not just for college, but for your state requirements. This is awesome.
Well, no, thank you for saying that. I mean, absolutely. So one of the things we recognize is that, again, homeschoolers are berated with thousands of options constantly, right? And trying to figure out what the best option is. And unfortunately, most of those options aren't great, especially for standardized testing. Again, because they're Common Core aligned or they're aimed for some kind of public school curriculum or informed by it. And they they have not been updated in probably several decades. I mean,
Yeah.
these exams are outdated. They take forever. It takes a long time to get your results back. They take a long time. So we try to keep ours up to date in that sense, for just to create that better user experience. So they're all online. They're only a couple of hours. Every
Oh,
exam is
wow.
parent proctored.
Like
CLTA
one day. You don't have to break it up in several days.
exactly one
Oh,
day,
wow.
2 hours, right? And so
Really?
if you have
That'll sell it right
accommodations
there.
needs, yep. If you have accommodations needs, it's only 4 hours
Okay.
instead of 8, 10 hours or whatever. So I mean, because let's be real, after probably 2.5 hours, you're testing a baked potato. It's not a
Yeah.
human being. It's just not natural to do
True.
that to a kid. So, and I love what
Mhm.
Carrie said. Thank you. We
That's
pride
perfect.
ourselves in the analytics. Again, to serve the to serve especially homeschoolers, but to serve anybody really, parents, teachers, school administrators, and students. Take the exam, look at your analytics. It's included in every exam. And you can see, and it goes on every time you take an exam, it's updated. So you can see, okay, how am I doing? And so a lot of parents will take an exam at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year.
Wow.
And that's a great way to assess,
Yeah.
okay, what did we do throughout the year, right? How is seventh grade go along? All right, now we're entering eighth grade. How do we do that? So anyways, I go on and on and on, but good stuff.
And Alec, I'm glad you mentioned that CLT is taken online, because I forgot to mention that. And I think that's probably what makes this test the best for homeschoolers is you can take it from your classroom, which is your home. And our CLT8 is parent proctored. So your parent, is involved with this process. And then our exams for older students are remotely proctored. You can take them online. So even though I had fun going to those public schools to do my testing, my mom probably would have liked it better if I was at home.
So, and with some of the tests, the rules, I don't know if this is a rule that the test has or the state has, but the parent cannot administer the test. It has to be somebody else with a bachelor's degree or higher. So even if the parent, I have a bachelor's degree, I couldn't administer the test. That's not an issue because this is all online, and so we don't have to worry about that, right?
So there's a couple of things that I'll say to that. So I know that you might be familiar with the National Homeschool Honor Society, or a couple of those organizations, and so they do require that it's a separate proctor
Okay.
for say for the CLT8 or the CLT10 in order to qualify for some of those things. And so right now, what we're currently figuring out, this is my job to figure out, is how do we set up those situations for proctors? And fortunately, we have a very robust system with how we work with private schools and charter schools. So we
Okay.
actually do something similar. So if you're part of a co-op like Classical Conversations, or even a local or like a university model school or anything like that, one of those kind of hybrid models for homeschooling, still homeschooling, then we have options for that where students can say we want to take the CLT10 together, and you can have several students in their community come together and take the exam. And then for the CLT, our college entrance exam, that one is not parent proctored, it is remote proctored, so it's still at home and online. But we actually built our own remote proctoring technology last year because of everything, and this allowed us to make sure that colleges are getting accurate information. There's no cheating or anything involved, and we trust parents. That's why we have our other exams be parent
Okay.
proctored. They are the
Yeah.
primary educators after all, but the colleges require it, so that's why we use remote proctoring technology.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Could you describe what you see as one of the biggest challenges that students face today when it comes to preparing for college?
I can start with this one. I think I felt very distracted from the college search because I was just so worried about getting my scores up. But as I've reflected on how I chose where to go to college, and I believe I still went to the best college ever. Little shout out to Hillsdale College, but St. John's is great too. That's where Alec is from. That's where he went to school.
No, I've
But
only ever heard good things about Hillsdale. So,
oh, well, good. But as I reflect on that process, I realized I only applied to 2 schools. I didn't have the bandwidth or the time or energy to sort through all my options, and I thank the Lord that he gave me a really great option with Hillsdale. But I realized that I was so focused on building the resume and the test scores and all the other things that by the time I came to look at colleges, I had this great portfolio, but I hadn't really thought about where I wanted to go. So I think that's one thing, is I think standardized testing should help students, not impede them, or not be this sort of gate through which they have to pass to get through college. And some colleges are test optional now, but colleges still want to see those test scores. So while they may be optional, colleges think it's better when a student has those scores. So it's definitely something students are going to need to show. But I also think another challenge for students is just choosing a college that is really going to nurture their soul, provide them with an education that will help them discover truth, but not tell them what truth is. And that's the whole point of education, is to equip the individual to discover capital T truth, because, you know, truth is objective. There's one truth out there. But many colleges are trying to tell students what to think, not how to think. So I think students really need to make sure that they're going to attend a college that will teach them how to think.
Wow. This is incredible. I mean, it sounds like this test is more geared towards the student and what they're learning, which is what a test like this should be. And we all know that other tests aren't that anymore. And so I just really appreciate that this option is out there. And it really, when I would get the test scores, maybe for the younger grades for the standardized tests, I could never understand it. I was so confused. But it sounds like yours is very user-friendly, and you really want to help the parents. You want to help them. You want to help the students so they can grow and so that they can achieve their goals. So I just think that is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
So you guys were both homeschooled, and like you mentioned, you had to go through this process yourself, and you shared a little bit about that. I was wondering if, as former homeschoolers, if you could give parents one piece of advice for their students, what would that be?
Oh man, I've been asked this question a lot of times, and I feel like every single time I give a different answer. But here's what I would say. And it's going to sound really nebulous and vague and big, but it's something I think it's about a mindset and a mentality. Ultimately, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to do things perfectly. That does not make you a failure. It does not mean homeschooling wasn't worth it. It was. I'm telling you now, it is. And it's good. And your kids are going to do fine. And they're going to be great. And you can't focus on making sure that, you know, they constantly do everything right in high school, and that they find the absolute best perfect college, and that they get the right job and do all this stuff. Because if you focus on perfection, you're never going to get it. Because you're going to constantly change what that perfection means for you, right? You're going to constantly reevaluate every time. And the goalposts, whether you know it or not, are moving every time so that you never achieve it. And so the best thing that I think you can do is remember that you're educating your children to provide for them when they're 80, when they're 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, not when they're high schoolers going into college. And I know it feels like that's what you're doing, right? Is to make sure that they get in the right college and that they start their life as adults the right way. But no, you're providing for them when they are, like Socrates says, you shouldn't, in the Republic, he says, you shouldn't even study philosophy until you're 50 years old. I think he meant that seriously. Like, we are constantly becoming more human every day, every year. And so we need to educate for people for a lifetime, right? And you know, we should build architecture that lasts 1,000 years, and we should build an education for a human that's going to live for an eternity, right? That's how it should work. So I know it's not very practical, and I know it's not, you know, like getting in the weeds for the homeschool education. But I think it's what my parents did, and whether they knew it or not. And the only real piece of advice I can encourage parents is that's what's going on. And don't homeschool parents are the movers and shakers of the world. They really truly are. And if I know it doesn't feel like you get a lot of congratulations, but I'm congratulating you now. Well done. Well done.
Aw.
Alec, I really can't add anything to that. I was thinking the exact same thing, that you are cultivating a love for learning in your student that is going to last a lifetime. And I think that is the point of homeschooling, is to teach your students how to learn and how to love that. So when they're leaving the nest, they're going to keep seeking that. And in my own life, I'm thankful that my mom cultivated my imagination. And I think that's another thing homeschooling does very well. It cultivates the creative imagination and then the moral imagination, which is the ability to contemplate virtue and ethics, but in a way that really opens the heart and touches the soul. And I'm thankful that my mom, she put us in front of Latin and really intense grammar and Dostoevsky. But then we would have days where we were going on field trips to the art museum, and we went to the La Brea tar pit in California and talked about the history of all these animals stuck in the tar pits. These random excursions that I remember all fed into my education to make it very holistic, and it really did nurture my imagination.
Wow. I just feel like there's so much to unpack for this past 30 minutes, because this just blows everything out of the water that people in my generation have been thinking. When we went into homeschooling, it's just how it is. You have to prepare your student for the SAT, and in the back of your mind is they have to be prepared for the SAT, and you wonder, are they going to be ready? And now that we know that, it isn't all about that. And I think a lot of us parents have come to that realization throughout the years of homeschooling. It's not about testing. It's not, it's about developing the person, but it's something that each one of us as a homeschooler has to come to ourselves. And it's hard. I was raised in public school. And so, there's a lot of that focus. And then we have a lot of homeschoolers that are coming aboard from other countries, and that's it's a cultural thing. It's cultural in America, but other countries even more so. Education is a primary focus, and testing. And so knowing that there is this completely different animal out there that we didn't even know was out there is just mind-blowing. And I'm so thankful that you guys exist. I just want to shout it from the rooftop that you guys are here, because for the parents who came to that realization, during their homeschool journey, it's just a sigh of relief. Okay, this is real. It really isn't about the test. And we can really focus on the character development of our children and focus on just developing who they are. So I'm just so excited about this option. Now, before we sign off, I do want to know if you could just share with us a little bit, how would a student prepare? Do they need to prepare to take this test? For SATs, maybe there's practice tests you can take. Is there something like that for the CLT?
Yes. Thank you. So I just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity and for your support and how it means the world to us. And like you said, it feels like we're preparing for the test, and we feel like we have to, and to some extent we do. We have to take a test, right? And that's why we're a standardized test and not, I don't know, a think tank or something. We are, but I feel it's funny. We're a standardized test that's run and built, and all the employees are people who don't love standardized testing, in a funny way. We do, and we appreciate it, but what we really love is good books and good stories. And at the end of the day, you're right. Your education is not. I would encourage people to ask themselves, what are you doing every day? How do you determine whether you're a good person or not? How do you judge that? Do you take a BuzzFeed quiz, or is there another way? I'm not going to tell you what the answer is, but I think you know. And I'm going to tell you right now that education is assessed very similarly. The standardized test is a tool, but it's not the way to assess whether you had a quality education. There's something else. And read Norms and Nobility. That'll help. Okay, so CLT. We are very excited. We have a special offer for you all. 20% off any CLT,
Oh, wow.
CLT10 or CLT8. Use the code Schoolhouse20. I don't know if you can put that in the chat.
Absolutely,
One
we
word.
can put it on, sure.
Okay, Schoolhouse20. So that'll get you
20 with the numbers.
20, yes.
Mhm,
Schoolhouse
20.
20. Thank you. So at cltexam.com, create a free account, and you can get 20% off any of those exams. Perfect. Thank you. And so we're a couple different options. So the CLT8 is itself a preparatory exam, and or kind of a end of grade assessment, preparatory exam, high school entrance exam. You can use it for any of those things. The CLT10 is also that. Excitingly, the CLT10 also has its own scholarship opportunities and award opportunities. So students who score highly in the country can be recognized nationally on our website. And then students at the top, I think it's top 50, is that right, Taryn?
Yep, top 50.
Get a $2,500 scholarship to a CLT partner school. So that's some great opportunities, kind of our equivalent to the PSAT. And then the CLT, obviously, there's millions of dollars in scholarships available from our different partner colleges using the CLT. So the best way to practice is to take an exam, use the analytics to see where you're at. We have 3 free practice exams for the CLT on our website and 1 free CLT10 practice exam.
Okay.
We don't encourage people to practice for the CLT8 because it's too young. It's supposed to be a benchmark exam, but then you can practice for the CLT10 or CLT. So you can do that online, and then we also have a student guide, which is a physical copy that has 3 more practice exams in it, in case you're old school and you like pen and paper. So
I do have another question I want to ask. So there's a parent that wants to assess their child maybe before the end of the year. What subjects are addressed in the CLT? Is it every single subject across the board, or which ones are the main focus?
So on our exam, it's sort of less about the subjects and more about the methodology. But we do have texts that are about philosophy, religion. We do have some texts related to science, sometimes history. So like I said earlier, the texts that are used for the questions cover a wide variety of topics, but the questions themselves are more about the students, the way that they think and their aptitude and their logic and critical reasoning. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I'm sure Alec can expand on that more.
Yeah, and I would just add that, so we have a comparison on our website, which is going to be updated thanks to wonderful Taryn. She's helping a lot with this. We're going to have a more beautiful website, more helpful. But there's still some really, really superb information on there as far as the differences between the CLT 8, 10, and CLT and the different grade levels. Basically, they're all identical, except they're scaled accordingly to the grade level. And it's set up very similarly to the SAT. So you have 3 sections. Verbal reasoning is the first section, which is your kind of critical thinking. Can you answer questions based off of a reading passage? The second is our grammar writing section, which is your mastery of the English language. And then the quantitative reasoning section, or mathematics and logic. So we actually are very similar to the old SAT, which was a pretty fine exam for what it was. And we have a lot of logic questions on there. So you'll see some analogy questions, this is to that as this is to X, right? So there's some really interesting, fun questions on there to try to figure out. But that's the overall subjects.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you would like to leave with our followers before we sign off?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know if there's any questions that people have in the chat. We're happy to answer them if you do want to put some questions in the chat. But if not, we just encourage you to head to our website, look at a practice exam, print it out, see if you like it. We think that you will. And, you know, people will have different experiences with the CLT, but we've tried to craft it in a way that hopefully answers best to a homeschool education. So thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you very much. And if you're interested more in also just the mission of CLT and our endeavors, please listen to our podcast. It's called Anchored. You can subscribe to our email newsletter to learn more information. We have an excellent blog with all kinds of additions from educators and thinkers to our very own students. They have some of the best essays that we publish if you take the exam. So one of your students might get published. And
Awesome.
Anything else, Taryn? I think that's all of our.
I mean, we have all kinds of fun things going on, like our podcast,
Yeah.
like Alex said. Right now, we are running a seminar series called Journey Through the Author Bank, and we are having professors from universities across the U.S. join us for a live seminar to talk about one of the authors on CLT's Author Bank, which is where we draw our reading passages. So we've already talked about de Tocqueville, we've talked about Plato, we're talking about Virgil this Thursday. So we do upload those seminars to YouTube after the fact. So you can watch those recordings on our YouTube channel. It's just Classic Learning Test if you want to look up our YouTube. We also have a mailing list to be able to join the live seminars. So I can real quick grab that link and maybe put it in the chat. I don't know if I have the power to do that. But if you want to learn more about Journey Through the Author Bank, you can also just head to our website, subscribe to our newsletter. We're always sending out the information about gaining access to all those things, our podcast, blog, all of that in our newsletter. So I think that's the best way to do it. Head to our website and subscribe to our newsletter.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank
you both. I really appreciate you taking the time every day to share about CLT with us. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. And I hope to see you next time on another Homeschool Live. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.